Hello and welcome. You're at JIMBY Live. Today we've got a great group of speakers to talk to you about their recent JIMBY research article about preparing for class. My name is Rachel Horak. I am ASM staff, and today's event is being brought to you from the ASM Education Department. When you have questions today, you're going to use the Q&A box to ask your questions. So if you look to the bottom of your Zoom toolbar, find the Q&A box and go ahead and ask your question, and you will have the option to ask anonymously. Also, if you see a really good question that you definitely want to see answered, be sure that you can upvote all questions. Today's presentation will be brought to you by Heather Bergan-Roller, Jaime Sabel, and Tina Ballard. And they're going to talk to you for about 20 to 30 minutes. And then we're going to have lots of time for questions at the end. I'm going to put the link to their paper in the chat so you can go ahead and read their open access paper. Just like all other papers in JIMBY are freely available and open access. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our speakers. Thanks so much for being here today.
There's the unmute. Still not used to this after 2 years. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, we're going to be talking about our paper. Just to introduce ourselves a little bit, I am Heather Bergan-Roller, an assistant professor at Northern Illinois University. This work was done with this really great team, some of which are here today. So Tina, if you want to introduce yourself.
So hi, I'm Tina Ballard. I am a reading professor at Elgin Community College, but I just finished my doctorate through Northern Illinois University, where I was able to work with Heather.
This work was also done with Sabel, who at the time was a postbac and now is in med school in California. It's awesome. And why she can't be here today. Then go ahead, Jaime.
Hi everyone, I'm Jaime Sabel. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at the University of Memphis. And I'll also introduce Kendra, who also can't be here today, but Kendra Wright is a PhD student in my lab, also at the University of Memphis.
Okay, and then Tina is going to start us off.
All right, so we thought we'd start with just some rationale and purpose for the study. And so we know historically instructors want students to be prepared for daily class sessions in addition to exams. But we know that because students who are prepared will ask better questions, they do better on exams. But more importantly, this daily preparation is really important for active learning classes where we need students to be able to engage with the material and with their peers. So next. We also know that students often are not preparing effectively for class. Some students don't know how to prepare, or maybe they don't understand what their professors expect from them. We also know that time management is an issue for many students. They might underestimate the time that they need to prepare, or they will often overestimate how much time they actually spent in things. We also know that students will frequently just try to cram for exams instead of using distributed practice, where they spread their studying out. And so next, we also know that studying for exams and preparing for class have very different goals. So when we want students to prepare for exams, we're probably looking for more higher level engagement and understanding, where they're remembering and applying the information. And when we want students to prepare for our daily class sessions, we really are just wanting them to become more familiar with the material. It's not as cognitively demanding, but we really want students to be able to engage with the material for the active learning strategies and with their classmates and peers. Historically, instructors have often assigned students to read chapters to prepare for class, but the research is showing that this is often ineffective. Many students just simply won't do the reading or don't do the reading. Others might try, but they're really skimming through it and not reading carefully to understand it. We also know that instructors, sorry, I lost my place. a lot of the research is focusing on how students are preparing for class, but those studies are looking at disciplines outside of biology. And we really need to understand specifically what the expectations are for biology, because the discipline is different, the discourse is different, the content is unique. So there are a variety of reasons why students might not engage with their textbooks. And we found that students, or the research has shown that students find the books maybe not interesting, but really the textbooks are challenging to understand. There's so many new concepts in each chapter. There's lots of vocabulary. It's very dense. Students might struggle with the idea of reading the charts and graphs and other visual representations and connecting it to the text. We also know that textbooks are really expensive, and so that limits access for a lot of our students. So other research has shown that there are supplemental activities or assignments that can be assigned for students both outside of class and in class. For example, professors might give their students reading guides or quizzes to do outside of class before coming to class. They might have them look through different presentations or interactive media, multimedia. During class, some professors have started giving reading quizzes or using clickers or other types of technology to help engage students. And we also know that these things all do help improve student outcomes. However, there's reasons why these are not used commonly, right? Some professors may not know about them. They don't understand the value of them. For a lot of people, I'm not familiar with them, or I don't have the technical support. I don't know how to actually use them. And then of course, time is always a huge factor. There's never enough time to get everything done. In looking at it from a different perspective, we know that students are really resourceful and can use lots of different information, especially online, to answer their own questions. And so we wanted to look at this resourcefulness of students to see how students will choose to prepare for class when given the choice. And this was based on the research and enhanced effective engagement hypothesis, where we know that choice increases student satisfaction, effort, attitude, engagement with the material. So this research was specifically looking at characterizing how students prepare for the introductory biology class, if they prepare at all. And we wanted to use the information to help guide instructors on how they can best help students prepare for class.
To answer those questions, we specifically looked at that first question, if and how do students prepare for intro bio? And we looked at what resources students were using. So these are the materials they're using, a textbook or video, but also how do they engage with these resources? Are they reading? Are they watching? Are they creating a quiz? Are they working with each other? This is what we call actions. And further, we compared between two treatments. When students either had the freedom to search for and choose their resources, which I'll represent here with these binoculars, or when we gave them very specific textbook readings. And we asked if the treatment affects if and how students prepare for class. So we did this at an R2 regional comprehensive university, again, at the introductory cell biology course, commonly biology 1 of the two semester intro series. And we used a quasi-experimental approach in which each semester had a different treatment. For the assignment, where we got our data, students were asked to familiarize themselves with a detailed list of topics for each class. For the choice treatment, students were directed to search for and choose their own resources, but we gave them a pretty long list of examples to choose from if that would help them. Text treatment, students were directed to read very specific passages from the textbook. So not just chapter 5, it was chapter 5, heading this, subheading this, these paragraphs, really specific reading assignments. And then we asked students to report on how they prepared for each class by filling out a Google form. When these are the questions that each treatment group was asked in that Google form. When students would submit that form, it would pop up as a line in our Excel spreadsheet, and we labeled that an entry. So each row and each time they submitted for each class was an entry, and that was the data that we used for this research. We then took those entries and did thematic content analysis, in which a group of us mostly Sabel, Tina, and I, would read students' entries. We would separately draft ideas and codes about what we were saying, and then we'd come together and discuss them to see if anyone else was seeing what we saw. And then we would go about this reading, drafting, and discussing over and over and over again until eventually we could produce a code book. And what a code book is it serves as a sort of instructional instruction, so that I really could give anybody the code book and the set of data, and they would come up with the same results that we found. We also did some quantitative analysis, and here we used linear models to compare between the two treatments. So again, if each treatment differentially affected quantities of the number of entries, that number of actions, or the number of resources students were reporting on as they prepared for each class.
All right, so looking at the results, we first asked did the treatment affect if students prepared for class? And just as a reminder on this graph, the binoculars are representing the choice treatment where students were given the option of how to prepare. And on the right, we have the book icon, which represented the text choice or text treatment. And in a nutshell, we found that no, I'm sorry, I forgot. So there's there were 39 possible entries that students could have prepared throughout the semester. Those represented the non-exam days. However, in order for students to get full credit for the assignments, for the points, they only had to do 30. And so we're looking at those different numbers. And so we wanted to know did the treatment affect if students prepared for class? And in a nutshell, we found, nope, not really. That in both treatments, students submitted a similar number of entries, about 24.5, which was about 81% of the required 30 entries, or I'm sorry, and 63% of the 39 possible entries. So the numbers were pretty similar.
Okay, so Tina talked about if they used them, and I'm going to talk about how students prepared for class and if the treatment affected that at all. So again, we have our actions and resources that we're going to be looking to see how they use those. And then we also did a grade bin analysis looking at if students in different grade levels, A's versus B's, if they used the resources any differently. So again, binoculars are choice, textbook is textbook. So typically students reported using 1 to 2 actions for each entry. The text reported more entry than choice, and that was a significant difference. And so now what we're going to do is actually look at the different kinds of actions that they took. So that's over on the left-hand side, the read, took notes, watched videos, etc. And we're going to walk through and look at the different levels of each of these. So first, reading was reported the most frequently for both choice and text. You can see there that for text, it's even higher than it was for choice. The second then, there was also a high percentage of those who watched videos. Again, in this case, more choice than text students use this option. And then there were also students who did nothing at all. And you can see that actually 5% of those that were assigned text did nothing at all, while only 0.04% of those in the choice group used nothing at all. Okay, so now I'm looking here at combined actions. So a lot of the students didn't just do one thing. And so that's why on the previous slide, not all of those things added up to 100 because students could choose more than one thing. So here we see, based on the couplings, that reading and taking notes was the very most common. And a higher percent of text entries combined reading and taking notes than choice. Okay, so that was the actions. Now we're going to talk about the resources. So here we're looking at the number of resources that they said they used. Students typically used 1 resource per entry, although, as I mentioned before, sometimes they did use more than 1. And this was regardless of treatment. So again, no significant difference between choice and text groups. So the different kinds of resources they used are there in the left-hand column. And so we can see that the text group used the textbook more. I think we could probably expect that. But the choice group used websites more. And so we were really curious about the kinds of websites that they used. And so we dove into that a little bit in more detail. And so you can see that the major ones here were YouTube, textbook-like sites, or Khan Academy. So, oh, yeah, one more thing, just to say that YouTube and Khan Academy are both more video type lecture resources, where textbook-like is obviously something that is more like reading like a textbook. Okay, so now we're going to look at the grade bins and how the students at each level of grade, how they perform. So we were wondering if the treatment was related at all to course performance. Okay, and so this is complicated, so I'm going to walk you through it. So what you see along the left are the grades that students got. In the right next to that, you see the number of students who, say that top line, 9 students in the choice group got an A, while 7 students in the text group got an A, and on down. And then what we're looking at is the comparison between choice and text groups for each of the 3 things: the entries, the number of entries, the number of actions, and the number of resources. And throughout this, we found no significant relationships at all. And we also looked at this qualitatively and also found no consistent or noteworthy qualitative differences between choice and text groups based on their grade. Okay, and so this is just showing you some of that data. So here's looking at entries. You can see, especially over there in the F bin, that there is quite a bit of a difference there, but it is not significant. You can see how much overlap there is. So there's entries, and then we have actions. Again, no significant difference across these. And then resources. No significant difference here either. So we were obviously a little disappointed, in the how many non-significant things we saw, but we also looked at within groups. So that was between groups, between choice and text. We also used ANOVA with post-hoc Tukey tests to look at within groups. And so we found there were no significant differences within the choice group at all, but there were significant differences within the text group, not for actions or resources, but for entries. So the number of entries that for students who earned Fs was significantly lower than the number of entries for all other grade bins. And the same was true for students who earned Ds, were also significantly lower number of entries than those who earned As.
Okay, so what does it all mean? We've spent a little bit of time kind of going through these raw results about if and how students prepare. And now we're going to talk about how we can apply that information to inform biology instructors on how we can help our students prepare for class better. So on these slides, there's going to be some of these plots, but you've seen all of this data before in those raw results. So one major takeaway we found was that students did seem to work towards meeting the expectation to prepare for class. Like Tina said when she talked about this slide, students were preparing for about 81% of the required courses to get the full participation points. Even though that was only 2/3 of all courses, they kind of were meeting our expectation that we set for them. And results from a few other studies have also shown that when instructors provide guidance and an expectation for students to prepare, that seems to help motivate students to do so. Second, that having the instructor provide those resources versus having students search them out seems to be a better way to support students in how they prepare for class. Here we saw that students use one resource, but the text group, regardless of treatment, but the text group did more with that resource than the choice students. So we interpret that through the lens of cognitive load, capacity, and allocation. So what that means, how we're translating that is that maybe students only have so much energy to allocate to preparing for class, which I'm kind of representing with this bucket. So when students are tasked with finding their own resources, they're using up some of that energy. So then they have less energy to dedicate to engaging with those resources. Versus the choice or the text students, when they were given that resource, they could then apply all of that energy to engaging with that resource. So they didn't just read or watch a video, they were also taking notes and doing more to engage their minds with that resource. And then finally, we think when providing resources for students, they could reflect what those resources are, could reflect what students' choices are. So here, the textbook was still a popular choice, Well, we don't know if that was really an intentional thing or if that's just what students are familiar with or what was easily available to them. But something to note is this website that our choice students seem to favor. They were favoring website, getting their content from websites, whether that was just text or video and text. When we looked at the types of websites they were going to, a lot of them were those voiceover PowerPoint sorts of things. Caveat to this, however, this work was done before COVID and before so much content was online asynchronous and students were on their computers so much. So maybe it's time for a replication study on this to see if students would choose differently now that they've spent so much time in front of screens. So just to summarize, students seem to work to meeting the expectation to prepare for class using one resource and 1 to 2 actions per class. And we think instructors should invest in helping their students prepare for class, which may include making that expectation of their preparation really explicit and giving them guidance on how to do so, providing them resources in that guidance, and also considering what students want for resources. Future work, we want to look at how the different ways students prepare for class actually affect learning outcomes beyond their grade bins, more some fine-tuned learning sorts of things, and also how does it affect how they engage in class in those active learning class time. This is just our things of our acknowledgement to say thank you to the people who helped make this work possible, but also thank you, and we are open for questions.
So Heather, I did answer one question just in the question and answer that I thought still maybe we could talk a little bit about, but someone asked if the set of students for each choice stick to the choice, and if the choice students only focus on the choice treatment options and vice versa. And so I said that the students were in 2 separate sections. The choice students didn't even know there was a text section, but then there was a follow-up question. Wondering if it will help students to have both. For example, if I provide resources and they choose from those resources and also the textbook.
That's a really good question. And it's actually something that I tried the following spring, which was spring 2022, or sorry, spring 2020. This was spring 18, 19, and then 20, and then 20, the world changed. So I have half of a semester of that data and didn't get to any use it, because we only had half the semester. So I think that's a great question. I think providing options would be really good because it gets them whatever they want to choose, whatever they're in the mood for, getting that content. It also does put more work on the instructor, right? Because now you're finding multiple resources, good quality resources for that same content. So it's kind of a value of your time as well. I think providing options is a great idea. Like I said, I tried it and haven't been able to complete that yet.
We've already got some great questions coming in. So please keep them coming. And so if you're unsure how to ask your question, you're going to go to the bottom of your Zoom window and find the little Q&A icon and click on it and ask your question. And you do have the option to ask anonymously. And if you find a question that is very similar to yours or you really want to know the answer to, go ahead and use the upvote, and that will help us identify what kinds of questions that we should ask our speakers. Can I start quickly with a Q&A asking you, if you wish to respond, how did you get the background in preparing to do a research study about student learning? Because I don't know your backgrounds, I've just met you, but my guess is that you probably did your graduate work not in biology education research. And if that's the case, tell us a little bit more about how you learned to do these types of studies.
Yeah, so I can start, and then we each have a very different story. So my PhD is in cell and molecular biology, kind of from the molecular to physiology level. When I was there, I had some really wonderful mentors to show me how teaching science could be scientific in itself. So I got to learn about discipline-based education research, and I really fell in love with it, even though I didn't think teaching was in my future. We teaching is different, but I wasn't that interested. I loved research so much. So this is really cool blend of teaching and research. So from there, I took a postdoc at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, and that's what this postdoc was all about, learning how to do this sort of research. And actually, that is where I met Jaime. She can tell you her story.
Yeah, so I actually did do my graduate work in biology education research. I was a developmental geneticist before. That's where my bachelor's and master's are in. And I worked in that field for a while, but then I went back and did a PhD in science education. And that's where I learned how to do all of this. And then I came straight to the University of Memphis after that.
I have a very completely different background. I was a high school English and biology teacher for years, and then started teaching at the community college. And so my doctorate was in disciplinary literacy and how learning happens in different disciplines. And so because I used to teach biology, that was really interesting to me. So I've kind of worked with Heather on this project.
For sharing. For those of you that are interested in learning how to do this type of work, I just put a link in the chat about an upcoming webinar series called Getting Started in Biology Education Research, co-sponsored by ASM and SABER, which is the Society for Advancement of Biology Education Research. And here we have a variety of speakers. It's a 7-week course and it's completely online. And you can come and learn how you can get started with projects like this with the end goal that maybe at the end you'll develop a network, you'll develop some skills to learn how to do quantitative, qualitative analysis, thinking about ethics issues, that kind of thing. If you're interested, take a look. Okay, let's go to some questions. Let's talk a little bit about the textbook and the textbook treatment. Was the textbook available online? And the second part is, was the textbook listed as a required for the choose your own group?
For the choice group, it was not required. It was an optional textbook. As for what the textbook is, we use Classic Campbell. When I came to NIU, that's just kind of what they've been using. Except for we're very careful. We're, like I said, a regional comprehensive university, so we're very sensitive to our students' financial needs. So we recommend older versions of the textbook just for cost reasons. So there are some versions of that textbook available online. I always give them the first unit as a PDF. If it's under 10%, it's safe from copyright. So my library tells me. So they gives them some time to get the textbook in if they want it. Otherwise, they have been very resourceful and found ways to get online versions. But what I'm assuming that they were mostly using was the physical text and not a digital version of that text.
So it wasn't required for the choose your own group?
It was not required for the choose your own group, correct.
And we'll stay on the topic of treatments. And the choice treatment, were the students provided with options, or did they have to seek out all of their own? I'll stop there and then we'll go on.
Yeah, sounds good. They were provided with options. So there's older versions. So like I said, at the beginning of the year, when we assign the textbook to the class, when students enroll, the textbook was optional. It was recommended, but it wasn't required. Also, old versions of Campbell's PowerPoint slides, they have posted online. I think they're on like version 13 now, but version 9 is available online, so they have that. I also provided links from that students had shown or told me before that were useful, of videos and like Quizlet sorts of things, like quizzing sorts of things. So they have a handout, and the handout is part of the supplemental materials in the paper with all the details and examples of the options for the choice group.
My first semester of college biology, I used Campbell too. It's a great book. Would you predict that the effect on cognitive load be lessened if the students were given a choice between 3 different options provided by the instructor? For example, watch this video, or read this section, or complete a simulation.
Anyone else want to chime in too?
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in on this one. I I do think that cognitive load would be reduced. I think the issue though with that is that puts a lot on the instructor to find all of these different resources for one, and that's certainly doable. But secondly, I think, we know that students do seek out their own, especially online content anyway. And so giving them the different options, I think they may or may not use them and still just go look for their own as well. So I don't think it would be a bad idea to do that. I don't know that that is exactly what I'm not sure that that's still what students would do exactly.
That's okay. I'd like to stay just a little bit more on control versus treatment groups. In the textbook group, they only have one subject, but in the free choice or source group, they do not have some particular subject. How does the source group decide what to try to find? You have any insights?
Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by subject. To provide clarity on what the assignment is, so I think that would help. So for both groups, they get really detailed list of topics. So let's say on Monday, we're going to be talking about introducing the cell cycle. So I have a list of like key terms essentially related to what we're going to talk about in class. And that's what they're given to prepare for. So I'm assuming that's what the subject is. So both treatments got that really detailed list of like key terms that they should familiarize themselves with before class.
Transitioning onto a different topic. Have you considered the effect of open OER or open educational resources textbooks, and perhaps that would impact the outcome of your study?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting topic as well. And it's something we've looked into, like I said, because we're very conscious of students' financial situations. We didn't include it here. I think, yeah, it's definitely an interesting additional treatment that could be looked into. The online, it seems that the students were liking the screens anyway, and that's where, those online open education resources are housed anyway. So I think that, sometimes I wonder if like students want physical books or not, but it seems like that cohort of students were happy to look at screens more than a physical copy. So that would have played into that pretty well.
This is a follow-up to a question a little bit while ago. Did you restrict what resources students could use in your free choice treatment?
Yeah, I have it up over here too. Yeah, no, we didn't. We didn't at all. We asked for them to kind of tell us detailed about what they use, but we never gave them feedback to say, no, don't use that, or like you're limited to this sort of thing. Nope, they could do whatever they wanted.
They were doing whatever they wanted. Did you have any concerns about students using low quality or incorrect resources, or not working on their reading and writing skills? Okay, I'm not sure about the second part, but maybe the person who wrote that could talk about that a little bit more. But my biggest concern here is, do you have any concerns of whether they were using low quality, incorrect resources?
I'm happy for anyone else to chime in too, but it was a concern, and it's one of the reasons I haven't gone all in the open resources yet, because I haven't spent the time to investigate fully to see if they're phenomenal. I think Jaime used them in your class. Do you open access? Yeah.
In the past, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, as far as like low quality content for intro bio, I mean, certainly you can stumble upon like incorrect, like detailed facts, but I think because we're covering like an overview and trying to get some big conceptual things, I wasn't that concerned. And because I know, they were going to Khan Academy, which the videos that I've seen are pretty good. The things that I've seen pop up more recently are like Amoeba Sisters. they're a little bit, I think, lower level than where I want them to be. But to get them ready for class, I think it's totally appropriate for them, again, just to familiarize themselves. I don't want them to use that as like the end all be all study material, but to just familiarize themselves with class, I was okay with that, because then we could use that class time to dive a little deeper into the topics and pull out any difficulties students were having grappling things. We have that class time to do those things.
Yeah, I'll just add to that that we know that students are, even if they're using the textbook, that they're also using online resources. And so I think this is always a concern, honestly. And with the choice, they of course still had access to the textbook. And that's not the only resource that Heather was giving them, right? Like there was class time and there were slides and there were these other things that if they were looking at low quality things to find at least these key words that, you know, probably they're going to have more in-depth understanding by the time they get through class and then study the particular things that the instructor has highlighted.
More of a comment, but maybe you have some insight into this. They were surprised by the low numbers of students taking notes. Do you find that that's very typical, or did that surprise you as well?
I will add, if you're okay. I teach, like I said, reading classes, and students, for the most part, from my experience, don't think that they need to take notes. They think, well, I read it, so I'm good. And so we spend a lot of time talking about how you can't remember everything that you read and how taking notes is important. So I was not necessarily surprised by that number, but.
I was surprised, but yeah, Tina's insight was really helpful. Yeah, I was surprised. Yeah, I was surprised. And it's kind of a mix too. I would think taking notes, especially for textbook, is a very like common thing. Taking notes while watching a video would be a little bit more foreign, I guess, for me, just from my learning experience. But that was, my learning experience is different than students of today. So.
Always good to remember what resources are available and how the student experience is different than when we were in college, right? Like I was in college, the internet was kind of a baby and we didn't learn from videos, but there's this great resources, especially as you stated for intro bio out there, huge number of resources freely available out there. This question comes, how about handouts provided by the instructor? Did that differ by treatment groups?
The only difference in the handout was the assignment for the class prep. So at the beginning of the semester and every unit, they would get a class prep assignment. I mean, they had an overview like this class prep assignment is going to happen through the whole semester. And I would give them per term because per unit, I would give them a new list of terms per class because giving them one document, it's like 12 pages long and a little overwhelming. So I'd break it down. But otherwise, the only difference in the handout was what resources they were directed. And again, those are part of the supplemental materials that are attached to the paper if you're interested in using those or looking at them further.
As Heather was saying, the supplemental materials and the paper are freely accessible, open access through Jimby. Okay, so now we're gonna take a quick, oh, hang on, well, I was going to. Okay, we're gonna take a quick break and don't worry, we're gonna come right back in about 1 minute and we're gonna do the final couple of questions. So if you have questions, this is your opportunity again to think of them and put them in the Q&A. But we're going to take a quick break and launch a feedback survey. And I guarantee this will take you about 10 seconds, but we would love some feedback. Keep in mind that Jimby Live is being provided free of charge to every person, and it's supported by the American Society for Microbiology. And in order to keep providing programming such as this at no charge, we do want feedback that shows that this is important to our members and to the general biology education community. So please do help us continue to provide this kind of programming by giving us feedback. Thank you so much. Okay, let's go on. We got some more great questions here. So course evaluations, always a little touchy subject, especially if you're doing lots of active learning and asking students to do things other than just sitting and listening to a lecture. So are you able to comment? Are there any notable differences in in student satisfaction and course evaluations?
I will comment on this because, and I know this fresh in my brain because I just submitted my tenure packet and gave my tenure talk where I had to collect all that information and hand it out. There was a difference between the 2 semesters. However, I would say that difference came from me and me describing what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and the value of that. My first semester, I just jumped in. I was like, this is what we're doing. It's great. You're going to love it. And that they were not sold by that, unfortunately. But the next semester and semesters since, I've taken more time to be more intentional and go slowly about what we're doing and why we're doing it and what my background in education research is. So I think there was a difference, but I don't think it was a difference due to these different treatments. I think it's my approach to introducing them to active learning. That was probably the difference.
There's something to be said for being very upfront and transparent about your approach. So I really like that.
Yeah, and I value being explicit, but sometimes I don't think about having to be explicit about certain things. So yeah, I have this whole analogy about like traveling overseas, you get uncomfortable, but you like learn so much. So yeah, we have an active learning activity about learning active learning.
Excellent. And I always have to remind my students, learning is uncomfortable. And if you're not uncomfortable and you're not sure what's going on, that's a great thing. You really need to approach that comfort, and it's okay. And we're going to do it together.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of that Goldilocks of like outside your comfort zone, but not like too far of uncomfortable.
That's right. Or else you're just going to lose them.
Yeah.
So this attendee said, complimented you that this is a very interesting talk on a familiar topic that all educators have to deal with on a daily basis. And we always have to remember that getting prepared for class is an essential skill, whether it's for school or graduate school or for work. Have you looked into the factor behind the highest number of students that were cautious about preparing for the specific topic rather than going for their own choice? Okay, maybe cautious isn't the right word. Would you like more clarification from the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
While you're pausing, I'm just gonna talk about a little side conversation we're having over here. Jaime Dyer is a friend and colleague of mine, and she mentioned that when she shows a video in class, she has to tell her students to, okay, take notes. And she said it's not just some magic where they get to, when watching a video, kind of sit back and they think, again, absorbing, but be explicit, to tie into this most recent question, be explicit about telling your students to take notes. So thanks, Jaime, for sharing that with us.
I have found with my students, they don't know what it means when I say take notes. And maybe it's a different type of student, but being really specific about here are the things that you need to do while you're taking notes, I think and what you need to write down is helpful as well.
Another comment came through from an attendee: providing a guided viewing guide is also a great intro for an intro class, and teaching students how to watch actively rather than just hanging out. Another question: did you get any feedback from students in terms of their perception of the efficacy of choice versus text? Related, and I can repeat this if necessary. Did students complete any sort of reflection or metacognitive activity to assess their own success in relation to the treatments? Did they feel like they understood or were getting better and able to participate, engage in class, depending on their treatment?
Yeah, so first, about the first part, I do have it up here, so because it's a long question, but the terms of their perception of the efficacy of the choice versus text, because they were different semesters, they didn't really know about the other treatment. But asking about any sort of metacognitive reflection activity to assess their own success, yes. And what I don't know if we collected the data from these semesters, but in the spring 2020 and what I've used since, I have asked them, at the beginning of the unit, they get, or the module, they get learning objectives. I do ask them to reflect on those objectives and tell me like how they feel they've mastered those. And I also ask them for the required materials, do you think the text or the text assigned text was beneficial? Do you think the PowerPoints were beneficial in the online asynchronous world that we've been in? Do you think the videos are beneficial? And like which of those do you think helped your learning? So a little bit of the reflection and the metacognition. It's always been kind of a future work to dive into that and investigate it. And part of why I brought in Jaime, because Jaime really is the metacognitive expert.
I'm just going to ask you about directions of future research. So you're thinking the metacognitive process is a primary aim. Cool.
Yeah, that, and I would like to see do some observations, classroom observations, to see how these different treatments would affect how they engage in class if there's a change there. Because that's the whole, for me and my active learning class, that's the whole point of helping them prepare for class, is so that they can engage meaningfully in class. To see what effect these treatments would have on that engagement, I think would be really, really interesting.
Your next IRB. Hope to see
Yeah,
live with that study.
Yeah, and we gotta have in-person class for that to happen. We've been online asynchronous for a couple of years, so it's a different sort of engagement. Yeah.
Wow. How about the summer and the fall? Is that coming soon in person?
Yeah, I teach this course in the spring, so I have a little bit more time. It was supposed to be in person this last spring, and then Omicron over break. It's a 100-person class, the variability of that. So we just kind of defaulted to something safe this semester, but hopefully in the future, very soon, it can be in person again.
A lot of educators share your sentiment. There's something about the energy of being with all of the students and running an active learning classroom. It's so much fun and exciting and engaging. It's not to say that you can't do it asynchronously, but we were all trained as educators with face-to-face learning. So I imagine that everyone's excited to get back to it. So with that, we are out of questions. And I'll just wrap it up by expressing my sincere appreciation to all of our authors for coming and joining and sharing their research with you today. Please do join us for the ASM Conference for Undergraduate Educators. So, oh, did I not put a link for that in there? Okay, hang on. So our conference this year is going to be entirely virtual. 3 days of live programming. For over 150 talks and 25 education research posters. So do put it on your calendar. Registration is open. We have 3 amazing plenary speakers. And the theme for this year is empowering undergraduates with science literacy. And our kickoff talk is all about science literacy. So do put that on your calendar and contact me if you have any questions. And this wraps up GMB Live for this season. And we intend to come back in the fall of 2022 for more episodes.